The Kingmaker here with a subject that may be sensitive for a lot of people. However, given the guilty verdict that we just received on the George Floyd case, I feel like this is the time to have this conversation. I had been going back and forth with myself for months on if the masses were ready to hear this perspective. And what I've decided is that even if it takes a while to digest, it's worth starting the process of shifting the collective thought on this subject. So, in order for me to address this the way I really want to, it's necessary to go back and point out some of the things that we've established up until now. So number one, we've established that you are the architect of your own reality. And if you watch my videos, if you share them, if you comment on them, you are fundamentally clear on that idea. We've established that when we look at dynamics in our everyday life and choose to acknowledge or accept that as our reality, that is the only reason it's our reality. That is us drinking the Kool-Aid versus being intentional about what we want to experience. We've established from the tip earlier today that our attention or focus to something is the exchange that determines what we receive. And fundamentally speaking, most people have heard of the law of attraction. I don't necessarily teach the law of attraction. I teach a process I call the creation of magic. But in that process, you cannot ignore the law and principle of creation, that is the law of attraction. It is a huge, huge part of it. So once we fundamentally address and identify that all of those things are true, now let's apply it to what we Black people as a culture have been dealing with for ever in this country, which is victimization, oppression, everything from slavery on up, being murdered, being all of the atrocities that have been committed upon us. I remember I went and watched the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. And it was an educational movie for me because I didn't know a lot of the things that had happened per se that way, especially with the Black Panther Party during that time. And at the end of the movie, I was in tears. And after I got over the initial emotion of it, it hit me like a ton of bricks that although the movie was educational, the emotion that it generated in me was one of being a victim. And, you know, the Black Lives Matters movement, to me, the most beneficial role that it plays is awareness. Less for us as Black people, but more for white people or other cultures to really understand what's happening. So I feel like the awareness was important and was necessary. And because of the support globally that we have received as a result of making people aware of what's happening, I think it's safe to say the majority are not in support of the foolishness that we've been experiencing. And a lot of the old racism is being challenged with the new perspective, with the new generation. Not to say that there aren't sects of people who are very, hell-bent on it, but I see a lot of positive support. All of that being said, the perspective that I want to challenge you to have around this experience is if you are the architect of your own reality, if you create your life experiences, the best possible way that we can combat, and I don't even want to use that word really, because that's really not how you fix things, but for the sake of articulating this in a way that can be understood, the best possible way for us to combat the atrocities that have been visited upon us is to no longer be a victim, to no longer see or think of ourselves as victims, to no longer allow other people to treat us as victims, to no longer feel helpless, to no longer think of yourself or your children, your young black men or grown black men, as helpless. Teach them to become the architect of their own reality. When you pay attention to something, you are buying more of that experience. The fear that black people live in of the police contributes significantly to what we experience. Nothing can happen to me in my life or to you in your life without you being the cause. Now, I say this fully understanding that when we're talking about, a car accident, a relationship, something to do with money, you can get behind it. And that this subject you might need to think a little harder on. So I challenge you to do that. Is it possible really that the laws and principles of creation stop applying because it's racial injustice? Or is it more likely that we've just been choosing to ignore or not pay attention to a big part of it, which is us? So, in the process of me listening to people talk about, since the verdict came out, there's been a lot of, happiness and joy. And then a lot of people coming behind and being like, but we have to be vigilant. Don't let your guard down. Don't think that just this one guilty verdict now means that we've solved stuff. Systemic racism is still a thing. All of which is true. So I'm asking you to be vigilant in a different way. Change the way you think. Change what you believe is possible for you. Change what you're willing to entertain as an option in your life. And change as many people's beliefs and thoughts as you can. Make this go viral. Challenge the other black people, people of color in your community, to think and feel and carry an energy of kings and queens, of empowered people who are not victimized, who no one could possibly, that they could never dare. We are so powerful. But the feeling of being a victim that I felt, and I've been in a situation before where I was in Florida and I was with one of my family friends who's probably about a decade or so younger than me. And I was visiting my family in Florida, and we went to my best friend's at the time's house to play cards, spades, dominoes, whatever, listen to music. And I was transported by my family friend, who was driving like it was like his first car, and this is back at least 5 or 6 years ago. So, he was probably just about 21 at the time. And it wasn't, a fancy car. It was it was a young black man's first car, right? And probably not even, that'd probably be accurate of mostly anybody, right? So, and he bought it on his own, and we're driving past police officers that were stopped on the side of the road, a collection of them. And my friend who was driving me did a rolling stop at the stop sign. It was like, I don't know, 50 feet away. And we get pulled over. And I'm thinking to myself, like, y'all don't have nothing else better to do? That's what I was thinking at the time. And then, so they come to the door and I can't even remember if they gave him a ticket or not, but I remember how I felt. And I have been pulled over multiple times because I speed. So guilty of this. But I have, for the longest I can remember, I've always driven a really nice car, and usually I'm to or from, at the time I was to or from work, so I'm dressed nice. Like, there's a completely different energy about how I was presented and how people saw. So what I noticed was initially was the distinction, the disparity between how people how police officers would approach me when I was speeding versus how we were approached in that instance. And so there was two police officers that came. One came to the left side of the car and the other one came to the right side of the car. And they asked him for his license, his insurance, etc., told him that he did a rolling stop, and then asked him if there were any weapons in the car. And I'm like, nobody's ever pulled me over and asked me if there were weapons in the car. Were there any drugs in the car? Then they come around the side of me. Then they're asking me for my driver's license. I'm like, why do you need my driver's license? Not only do I not live here, I'm not driving the car. So I was like fully offended. And I remember feeling for the first time, like tangibly, a small itty bitty, tiny 1/16 of what especially black men must go through. And when we were out of the situation, it razzled me to the point that I was in tears. And I just felt, what's the word I'm looking for? I felt antagonized, and that's not the word I'm looking for. I felt like not only my space, but everything about, and I was like literally just on my way back to my parents' house so I can get ready to catch my flight the next morning. And there was nothing about the circumstance that warranted any of what we received. But that was when I first started really paying attention to what our black men go through, because I watched it. And no one had ever interacted with me that way when I was driving my car and I was actually doing something besides making a rolling stop. Like, I was speeding. I was 100% guilty. That was the first time I started really looking at that whole dynamic differently. So I don't want this to come across like I don't get it. I do. One of the things, I have a podcast called Be Unrealistic as Fuck. And the reason I created that podcast is because the reality that we live in is a construct of what we all have accepted. But specifically, individually, the reality that you personally experience is the reality that you've accepted for yourself or created for yourself intentionally or unintentionally. So if you apply that to the situation that we're dealing with, social, in our social and economic climate, you have to ask yourself, what is it that we are doing? And I'm not talking about not complying when police ask us for stuff, but what are we doing mentally? What are we doing emotionally? Are we still living and emotionally operating like slaves? Do we still feel like the slaves that were being whipped and beat and had to beg for table scraps? Are we still functioning with that same energy? Because begging for justice is the same thing. We are not a people who should be begging for anything. Our very presence warrants respect. But we don't function that way. We don't walk with that power. We walk in fear. We believe that people can do shit to us. They cannot. Only if you allow it. And I don't mean allow it like, become a physical target for someone. I mean, allow it from what you think and how you feel and what you believe. I was having a conversation with someone shortly after watching the Judas and the Black Messiah. And we were talking about what happened in, was it Tulsa? In Black Wall Street? And they're like, see, white people wouldn't let us live. We tried to separate ourselves. And they came and found us and destroyed everything we had built. And I challenged that. Not that it happened, but why it happened. We were fresh out of slavery. We were still living in constant fear. The reason we went and did our own shit was because we were not being accepted. We were being mistreated. We were constantly in response to what somebody else was doing. And I'm saying, stop responding to the life around you and deciding that's how it goes. Create on purpose. Decide how the world works for you. In the video, what it means to become the architect of your reality, I relate that to cake. It doesn't only relate to cake. It relates to everything that's happening. The biggest area of opportunity for us to change systemic racism is to literally operate like it doesn't exist. It's to stop being victims to it. It's to stop living in a reality where we are subject to that. There's several steps that go into this. I want to start with opening your mind to the possibility that you can change everything by choosing different thoughts, by choosing different feelings, by choosing different beliefs, and fundamentally understanding that the reason that you're the architect of your own reality is because you are literally connected to the same God power that creates worlds. How are you a victim? How is it even possible for you to have anything but an amazing, wonderful experience unless you are not exercising your power? And that is what I am here to do. The reason they call me the Kingmaker is because I am here to change the way you think. I am here to change what you believe and empower you to new heights and to new levels that you never thought were possible. I'm here to help you claim your crown, to take your throne, and to create on purpose the life of your dreams. That does not involve being a victim or being oppressed. I want to keep this conversation going because I want to really get into the steps that we need to take in order to do that. But number one is decide. Decide that you are no longer a victim. Decide that being oppressed, that being murdered, that being targeted, that being treated like less than human is no longer something that you are willing to accept. And that doesn't mean go get a gun and shoot at people. That means that is a internal change that happens first. Be no longer willing to entertain any fear, any doubt, or anyone functioning with you any differently. Sometimes that requires you to put people in their place and to tell them the truth. And then I want you to practice feeling like the version of you that's not scared to be driving while black. Feel like the version of you that can be safe owning and being in places where someone could possibly think you don't belong, but you earned your way there. Let it not even cross your mind that someone could challenge your right to be where you are. Feel what it would be like if systemic racism was not a thing. If your skin color was not automatically a death sentence or some gauge of your value, unless it was a positive thing. Think thoughts and feel feelings that support this new intention and share it with others. When you're talking about racism, talk about it from a perspective of it no longer having an effect or power in your life. Start to promote and teach and share with others how they should be looking at what we experience. Do not view white people or anybody else as as people who can victimize you. And remember, when you doubt that this is possible, think about how it relates to everything else. Take the same premise that we're talking about and apply it to anything else, and you won't have a question. The laws and principles of creation work 100% of the time. I am here to burn to the ground the limitations that are holding you back. The way that you view yourself and your culture is one of them. So choose something different. Leave comments. I'm happy to do a second video and get into some more nitty-gritty of how we do this. The awareness is there. Progress is being made. But the fight and we're so used to struggling. We had to run away from our slave masters, and we're still functioning that way. We don't have to fight to be equal. We were born equal. And the only reason people treat us other than that is because we are still functioning mentally, emotionally, energetically, like we're still slaves. And if we really want to get into it, we can get into why slavery happened. You can never blame anybody else for your experience in life, ever. It's easy to. That's the cop-out. It's not on anybody else, it's on us. As not easy as this may be to hear, think about it, chew over it. And at the end of the day, ask yourself, would you rather be a victim? Even if it takes you some time to wrap your head around what I'm talking about. Let's just say what I'm telling you is true. What's the alternative? That you're a victim and you have to beg someone to treat you like a human being? That you have to live your life and your children have to live their life in fear? What feels better? The idea that you can control it, one mind at a time? Or that someone else is in control of your life or your death? Or how you're viewed or how you're not? We have been fighting the same battle for what? At this point, at least 100 years? And we've been struggling, we've been sacrificing, and we've been suffering through this. Isn't it time that we take a different approach? It should not take 50 and 60 years to make change. It shouldn't even take a decade, and it won't when we change. So I challenge you to change the way you think, to change what you believe, to change how you feel, to change what you're willing to entertain, and you will change everything. Until next time, sending light, love, and gratitude always, the Kingmaker.